When this event that I'm going to share with you right now does finally happen, nothing, and I mean nothing, will prevent the dollar from hyperinflating. The first step to understanding how the dollar will collapse is to understand something known as the petrodollar system. Now, I know that not all of you are history buffs, so I promise to make this simple and painless as possible. Sit back for a minute and I'll explain. In the mid-1970s, a deal was struck between the oil-producing nations of OPEC and the U.S., and then later with other nations. Now, according to this agreement, every barrel of oil purchased in the global marketplace by anyone must be purchased with U.S. dollars. So according to this new oil deal, any country around the world that desired to purchase a barrel of oil had to first exchange their national currency for U.S. dollars. This new oil deal became known as the petrodollar system. Today, with few exceptions, all oil transactions are made in U.S. dollars. This means that if you want to buy a barrel of oil anywhere in this world, you must pay for it with U.S. dollars. Now, there are a few exceptions, and I'll tell you about those in a moment. If you do not have U.S. dollars, you must obtain them somehow. One way for a foreign country to get U.S. dollars is simply to convert their currency for dollars on the open exchange. That, of course, involves a fee. A more complicated but advantageous way is to design a product and export it to the U.S. in exchange for your goods, and you get U.S. dollars. If you're a small business owner in Japan, you must first convert your yen into dollars to purchase oil. Mexico must convert its pesos to dollars to buy oil, and so on. Perhaps this will help you understand why so many Asian nations since the 1980s have depended upon an export-led strategy to grow their economies. Japan, for example, has very few natural resources, including oil. So they must import large amounts of oil, and of course this means that they must have lots of U.S. dollars. So Japan manufactures a Honda and ships it to the U.S. and immediately receives payment in U.S. dollars, which it uses to purchase oil. As you can imagine, this petrodollar system has proven very beneficial to the United States economy. Oh, and there's one more other benefit that I haven't told you about. Many of the oil-producing nations not only agreed to sell their oil in exchange for U.S. dollars instead of their own currency, but they also agreed to then take their excess profits and then invest them back into the safety of U.S. government bonds. So in essence, America receives a double loan out of every single global oil transaction. First, it increases global demand for U.S. dollars, and second, for U.S. debt securities. But wait, there's more, as they say on the infomercial late night. In addition, having oil priced in dollars means that the U.S. can print money to buy oil. Let me say this again. The U.S. can print money to buy oil and then have the oil producers hold the debt that was created by printing the money in the first place. What other nation on earth, my friends, besides America, can print money to buy something and then have those who sold it to them hold the debt for the printed money? As you can well imagine, Washington is thrilled with this arrangement and has been so for decades. The rest of the world, however, is not so excited about this system. Today, several countries are beginning to move their oil sales or purchases into other currencies in spite of the dollar. Just a handful of examples include Iran, Syria, North Korea, and Venezuela. By the way, that happens to be the old Bush axis of evil. You know, friends, what is happening in our world today makes a whole lot of sense if you simply learn to read between the lines. But that means that you have to ignore the quote-unquote official reasons that are constantly crammed down your throat by the mainstream media. When Iraq tried to move its oil sales away from the dollar and into euros in 2002, it felt the full force of the U.S. military bearing down on it. Within days of the U.S. entering Baghdad, the petrodollar system was put back into place. Did you hear about that story on the evening news? Now here's what I want you to see. When, not if, the petrodollar system begins to crumble, the dollar will begin its death spiral. Right now, America has a permission slip to print all the dollars that it wants to print. Why? because the world needs dollars to buy oil. It's that simple. So the Fed just prints away, knowing that the global demand for U.S. dollars and for U.S. debt should remain strong enough to prevent hyperinflation. However, when OPEC and the other major global oil players decide to pull the plug and finally denominate their oil sales in another currency other than the dollar, the artificial demand for the dollar will decrease. The U.S. will be stuck holding a lot of worthless paper dollars that no one needs anymore, which will ultimately lead to massive inflationary pressures on the U.S. economy. Don't think that this won't happen. Foreign governments are acutely aware of America's economic problems. Knowing this, many of them are biding their time by actively looking for alternatives to the U.S. dollar-denominated assets for investment purposes. In the months and years ahead, other global currencies will be strong competitors for these same global investment dollars. When the petrodollar system collapses, it will lead to astronomical interest rates and the end of the U.S. dollar.